Well, welcome to God Talk again. I hope you're finding us begin to be regularly. I know my mother has found it now, so at least I have one. And gradually we'll find an audience here with God Talk. I'm Pastor Dan Smith, and just now retiring from full-time pastoral ministry to do preaching and evangelism around the world with Quiet Hour and here with LLBN. So we've had many shows. I've done Flame of Truth on LLBN. We've done GPS and God's Prophetic Surprises. I just kind of finished up 111 or 112 shows, but other people are going to handle that now, and I have this show now called God Talk. So thank you for being with us, and these are all about God. Preached a sermon in my church the other day as I was moving through to retirement, and just wanted to speak about grace one more time. There's a crazy story about a lady moved into a town and wanted to get involved in the local church. So she heard that they were going to have a bake sale. Ladies were all making cakes, so she wanted to make a cake. But she forgot until the last night. So she raced around the house, found a cake mix, and so she made the cake, but hurried. And when she took it out of the oven, it fell in. She did not have time to make another cake, so she looked around the house. What could she do to stick in there? All she could find was a roll of toilet paper. So she grabbed that toilet paper and she stuck it in there, and then she tried to cover the cake over so it would look normal, put the frosting on it, and she took it down for the sale. Then she told her daughter, said, "You go down there. The moment that sale opens, you buy our cake so that no one will ever buy it, and we'll get away with this." When the daughter went down, somehow that cake had already been bought in the sale. What are you going to do? The next day, the lady was invited to a party of some kind at a rich lady's house that was part of the church. So she's trying to make a good impression with all these other ladies, all dressed up. Had a nice dinner, and then came time for the cake, and the lady brought out her cake. And she was just getting ready to stand up to go over and tell her, don't use that cake, when a lady cried out and said, "Boy, what a beautiful cake." And the lady of the house said, "Yes, I made it myself." And the lady who made it sat down and just said, "Let her experience this all by herself. There is a God. He's going to have some justice here." And everyone laughs, and it's a crazy story, because now they're going to open up a cake that's got toilet paper inside. It's a fake. And there are people in churches who have said that's what Christianity and what Protestant grace is. That God gives you credit and calls you righteous when you're really not righteous. You're a fake, because if you looked inside, you would know that you're not righteous at all. And God has no business calling someone righteous who is clearly not righteous yet. Is that what the gospel is? Well, people sometimes would ask me, "Pastor Dan, we've heard enough about grace. I think we've got grace figured out now." But grace is slippery. And you can get it for a while, and then the world begins to be around you, and you'll lose it again. I was speaking for Quiet Hour Ministries up in Washington here a few weeks ago. An old man came up to me, and after I'd been preaching grace, and he said, "You know, when I was 5 years old or something, I did something wrong. And someone came up to me and said, Jesus doesn't love you when you do things like that." One of my associate pastors last year told me that he had said that to his daughter. She had, I think, wrecked her bicycle riding around on Sabbath afternoon. And he came out and just mad that this bike had been sort of mangled. And he said to her, he said, "This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't been riding on the Sabbath." See? Not gracious. And we lose the sense and spirit of grace. So once in a while, we have to bring it back. Philip Yancey says in his book about grace that we live in a world of ungrace, where people are not gracious to each other, You want to get into medical school, you have to have the grade. You don't get in because of grace. You have to have your MCAT score. You have to have the GPA. You have to earn it. That's the way it is. There was a baseball player that's going to be in the Hall of Fame, I'm sure. Ichiro Suzuki. He's been playing up at Seattle for a long time, then in New York. So at 45 years old, he wanted to try again. He's been amazing. But he didn't have the numbers. Not getting hits. There's no grace. We'll let you just be on the team for grace. You're gone. Has 4,000 hits, not enough. You watch all these shows on television like Chopped. You don't keep up with the other person. You're chopped. You're out. March Madness, we have basketball. 64 teams start. 68 teams. But if you lose, you don't get another chance. You're out. There's no grace. See? I ran through a stop sign there a while ago, got a ticket. There's no grace. Okay. You're a busy pastor late at night. Okay. You pay your fine. Pay the price. My brother's trying to build a house up on the side of a mountain. He put a little broken down fifth wheel up there so he could stay in there while they're working on this house. The neighbor's mad that he's putting a house on her street. So she called it in. And you don't get to stay there until you have a building permit. So he had to leave and find some other place to stay. There was no grace. You have to follow the law, follow the policy. And everywhere else in life, you have to be measured, and you have to keep up, and you have to compete, and you have to have the goods, and you have to walk the talk, and you have to earn it. And then you come to religion, and you have to somehow take all that away and say, oh no, here we're saved by grace alone. I'm going to have you work on two words today. Before and after. You watch a movie like First Night, many years ago, where Richard Gere, the knight, wants to kiss the girl. But to kiss the girl, you have to run through this gauntlet of all these big saws and big things. No one else had gone through, cut and hurt. But he got through it. And you have to ask the question, do you get to kiss the girl before you run the gauntlet or after? After. Smith Barney, the old commercial with John Houseman, he says, we make money the old-fashioned way. We earn it. You get the money after you've done the work or before? It's after. You go to the Olympics and you are the best in the world at something. Then you get gold medal ceremony. You get a gold medal. You get a kiss from the girl. After you win the car race or before? It's after. It's after. A friend of mine, head elder of our church, wanted to do his granddaughter's wedding. 80 years old, get invited to do your granddaughter's wedding. How good is that? On a lakefront. I've seen the pictures. But he wanted to have the authority to do this wedding. So he told his daughter, they were driving somewhere, he said, can you check online, see where I can get ordained somewhere? And they found this church that will ordain you by the internet. So he answered a few questions while he's driving the van. He says, 30 minutes later, I was an ordained pastor for that church. I had to go to school for many years to get ordained. Is that correct? Does that seem fair to you? Should you get ordained before you've done any of these things or after you've done the school? Well, it's after. I went on to a cruise ship one time. A friend of ours was a ship's nurse on a cruise ship. So she said down in San Diego, come down and see me. So we went down there. We walked up the gangplank. There's someone checking you out. She said, this is my sister and my brother-in-law. We were not her sister and her brother-in-law. She told an untruth to get us in. The whole rest of the time on that boat, I didn't feel like I was going to get caught somewhere. Do you get on when you have a ticket? Or before you have a ticket or after you have a ticket? We're talking about retirement, maybe getting a camper. They have really cheap campers where you just have a bed in the back And you get a little 5-gallon bucket and put a toilet seat with duct tape on it, and there's your camper. Or you can buy one of these huge things that's got, lounge chairs and a big color TV and marble tops and a restroom and a laundry and everything. You're driving this beast down the road. Do they give you that $400,000 camper before you make the payments or after you make the payments? That's after. Everywhere in life, that's what it is. I went to the DMV when I moved here from Illinois. I was 41. I went into the DMV to sign up for my new driver's license. You had to take a test. You had to stand there and read the eye chart. And I got down the rows, and all of a sudden, I could not read the last necessary line in order to pass. And I got scared. What am I going to do? I'm a pastor. I have to drive to go see people. My wife's going to have to quit so she can drive me around. That's no good. And so I was scared. Paused. The lady over there said, does it look like an L to you? Yes, it's an L. And she passed me. Not supposed to do that. Do you get your driver's license before you pass the test or after? It's after. When you can demonstrate that you have the capacity. But now we go to the Bible. A woman caught in adultery brought to Jesus. Jesus begins to write the sins of the people who brought her, the accusers, in the sand. When they saw their sins in the sand, they all left. Jesus says, where are your accusers? He says, there's no one, sir. And Jesus said, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Did Jesus pronounce her forgiven and not condemned before she went and sinned no more, or after? And we would say from the before. Change came after. Zacchaeus, he's a tax collector. He's been cheating people. Jesus comes and says, I'm coming to your house today. He has dinner. He comes out and said, this man, salvation has come to this house. And Zacchaeus says, I will pay back 4 times everything I've taken from people. Did Jesus pronounce him saved before Zacchaeus changed his life and paid everyone back, or after? Thief on the cross. Jesus says, you'll see me in paradise. I'll be with you in paradise. Did Jesus promise him that he would see him in paradise before the thief paid back everybody that he had stolen from, or after? Is it before? Jesus said on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Did Jesus forgive them all before he died or after? Before. Before. The prodigal son came back to the father's house, promised to do good. Did the father accept him back before he went out to the fields to make up for all he had taken, or after? Before. Over and over again in the Gospels. In Acts chapter 3 and 4, Peter and John heal a man. He goes leaping and jumping into the temple. Did they heal him before he started going back to church, or after he began to go back to church? Before he went back to church. And God came to the people in Exodus chapter 20. And he tells them to get ready, and he brings them to the mountain, and he begins to shout with thunder and lightning and smoke. And in a big voice, he says, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. And they said, don't let him talk to us like that again. Whatever he says, we will do. Did God save them from Egypt before they promised to keep all those commandments, or after? It's all before. In our world, it's all after. But in the gospel with Jesus, it is before, it is before, it is before. Does God save you before you begin to change your life, or after you begin to change your life? It is a fundamental debate in the history of the Christian church. And it has divided churches and still divides people today. Is the gospel the good news that God saves you before you begin to change your life, or after you have already had some victory? I worked one time on 5 C's of the gospel. When does God pronounce you righteous? I probably grew up at the beginning that at the second coming, It's when the angel comes off the cloud and takes you onto the cloud. That is when God says, okay, I now pronounce you righteous. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Then I heard later, perhaps it's at close of probation. When God looks at your record and he decides that your record now merits putting you on the list. And then he says in Revelation 22:11, he who is righteous be righteous still, wicked is wicked still. Maybe that is when God pronounces you righteous. No. I grew up, I have an uncle who's passed away now, Maury Venden, pastored huge churches here in California. And Maury in the 70s began to talk. I was in college. That it's not at the second coming, it's not in the judgment. It's when you are converted. When you accept Jesus, that minute you go from lost to saved. Even if you haven't changed your life at all yet. After you come to Christ, you begin to change. But if you make some mistakes, don't be worried. Don't feel like you've lost your salvation. If you're in an elevator and you're going up, if you fall down, stand up again. You're still going up. If you're in a shower and you drop the soap, pick up the soap. You're still in the shower. Oh, that was a blessing to us. God pronounces you righteous at conversion before you've made any changes in your life. And then I heard it even better at the cross. It's not the second coming, not at the close of probation, not even when you were converted. Jesus already saved you at the cross. Jesus died for your sins. He took your sins and paid for them all. The veil was ripped from top to bottom. Things are settled already. Jesus cried out, it is finished. Everything has been paid. Every detail has been covered. Now you can walk bold into the throne of grace because you already were put on the list. Jesus died and took care of it all. Wonderful. Some people try to say that at the cross God switched his vote from no to yes. And we would say, no, you're already saved. God is the kind of God who says yes to you. And when you accept the cross, that is already something that was already there. Your name was already on the list. You have to fight God off. Hebrews 2 says, if we neglect such a great salvation, how will we be saved? You have already been saved. Jesus, by one life, saved everybody. Just don't say no to him, and you'll be saved. Oh, that was a blessing to me. But then we come to my fifth C. Wasn't that many years ago when someone showed me 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 9. This grace which was given to us from before the beginning of time. My fifth C is creation. From the beginning, God has already saved us. God is a God of life and salvation. You don't have to wonder about God. God did not switch his vote at the cross from no to yes because of Jesus. Jesus did not die to get God to change his vote. Jesus didn't die for God. Jesus said, "You've seen me, you've seen the Father." They are absolutely together. One part of the Trinity does not die now to satisfy the demands and claims of another part of the God Trinity. They are together. This idea that there is a God of justice and he wants to condemn everyone to be lost. But luckily, Jesus walks into the throne room of God and he said, no, wait. Before you hit the gavel, let me say a word, please. And Jesus says to God, I know he's a sinner, and I know he deserves to die, and I know that's probably what you're going to do. But I died for him. And if you don't do it for him, would you do it for me? And Jesus puts in a word for us. And he talks God into switching his vote from no to yes. That's what I grew up with. But in 2 Timothy 1 verse 9, it's much better than that. God did not learn grace after thousands of years. He was not holding back his wrath for these thousands of years and now he pours it out on Christ instead. No, God said yes to us from before the beginning of time. Grace is not something that God learned. Grace is not something that God became. Grace is something God just is. And that's all he ever is and all he ever has been. The cross did not make God into a forgiver. The cross is because God is a forgiver and he shows us the forgiveness of God. And so can we say very clearly, it is always before. Grace is before. God saves you before, not after. Grace is always before. And then change comes later. Can we be very clear? God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. God did not need the cross to forgive. God is the same today, tomorrow, and forever. Malachi 3:6, I change not. That is the way God is, forever and ever. Ellen White says, if you like her writings, as long as there has been God, there has been grace. Grace is not something God learned, something God figured out, something God achieved, God finally conquered his wrath. Grace is just something God is. It is the atmosphere of the world. It is who God is at the very core of his being. And this has become the biggest difference between the Catholic theology of salvation and Protestants. 500 years ago, there was this huge debate. And Martin Luther came and he said, God has saved us not because of anything we have done, but because of Jesus. And he declares us righteous. Before there was any change in our life, you are righteous not because of anything you have done, but because of Jesus. Oh, what a blessing. Started the whole Protestant Reformation. Catholic Church said, no. That would be a lie. That would be a fake. That would be the fake cake with the toilet paper inside for God to call you righteous when everybody and you know that you're not righteous inside. And so they had the Council of Trent and they voted over and over and over and over again, many statements. The idea that God would call you righteous before you've changed your life. Anathema, anathema, anathema. You have to decide, which is it? Does God pronounce you righteous and save you before you have changed your life or after? And we would want to be as clear as we possibly can. God saves you before because of Jesus. Then, yes, you grow. Yes, you change. The gospel that's to go to all the world is that God is the kind of God who saves you before. Before. Kind of get that word into your mind. Before. Can I read you the text? The gospel text. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. Saved by faith apart from works. Romans 3:21. Apart from works of law. Galatians 2:16. No one will ever be made right with God by obeying the law. Romans 11, verse 6. If by grace, then it is no longer by works. If it were grace, would no longer be grace. Titus 3, verse 4. Not because of the righteous things we have done. It's grace. It's grace. There's no more debate. It is by grace before. I collect stories. You take some of these stories, maybe you have some. They're not easy to find stories about grace. There was a black slave named Mr. Small. I forget the rest of his name. And somehow he was able to run away from his farm, I think is in North Carolina somewhere. And he was able to get a bunch of other freed slaves together. And they stole a boat. And they were able to take that boat and navigate it all and get to freedom. And they got free. After the war, he's free. He could stay in the north and be free. But he wanted to go back, and he went back down to the south and began to help other people. He began to help other slaves. And he ended up taking the owner who had been his owner before, who were now dirt poor, had lost everything, and he took them into his house and took care of them. Grace. He had been saved, and now he gives grace. It's always the way it is. You receive grace, you become free, and now you give grace to others. In Vietnam, there's the famous picture of the girl running naked because napalm had been dropped on her. I was in Vietnam recently and got to see that picture in the museum that's there in Ho Chi Minh City. She was 9 years old when the napalm was dropped, and she ripped off her clothes because she was so hot, 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 hot. She said, ripped off her clothes. Someone took the picture. She ended up coming over to America, then ended up in Canada, lives in Canada today in her 50s. And they took her, she became a Christian. They took her to a big convention where there was going to be Christian people and a Christian pastor who was the one who flew the helicopter when they dropped the napalm on her village. And they brought the two together, and as the pastor came and began to say, started to say he was sorry. Before he could even get the words out, she stopped him, said, I forgive, I forgive. God doesn't need anything before he forgives. He just forgives. He is a God of love and grace. May we learn to be that. One more, one of my favorite stories. I actually knew these people years ago when I got married the first time back in the 70s. She worked for these people. They were the Wormbrands. They wrote a book called Tortured for Christ. They used to smuggle Bibles into behind the Iron Curtain and all that. When he was a pastor in Romania, Lutheran pastor, one night his wife was in the other bedroom asleep. His neighbor came and brought a German, and it turns out the German was a prison guard at the prison where her parents had been killed. He tried to not show any emotion. He began to play the piano, German folk songs. Everyone's drinking and happy. He turned on the piano stool and he said, I believe you may be part of the group that killed my wife's parents. There was a little tension quickly in the room. He said, don't worry. But I'm going to do a little test with you. I'm going to go into my wife and I'm going to wake her up and I'm going to tell her, I believe the man who maybe killed her parents is in our house. And if she wakes up and says, I have to serve him supper, then you have to listen to the gospel. He went in, he tapped her on the shoulder, woke her up. And then when she woke up, he said, I think the man who killed your parents from that camp is here. She instantly put on a bathrobe and said, I need to serve him supper. And he got to give the gospel to that German guard. That's the way God is. Nothing has to persuade him. Nothing has to be said. No sacrifice has to be given. No change in your life has to happen first. That's after. God is a God who is the God of before. Grace is a God, religion of before. God loves you before. God gives you grace before. He dies for you before. Father, forgive them before. If I can get that one word into your soul that you can never lose again. Before, 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 before. This is God talk. Here we talk about the character of God who always gives us grace before. I hope you'll come back to us.